Welcome back. We're unpacking the ARC conference. It was recently held in London, England, November 2023. And joining me is Peter Stock, who attended the conference. And again, Peter, thank you so much for coming on. So you shared that one area of discussion was debt and inflation and housing affordability by extension. And I suppose I was somewhat pleasantly surprised to hear that this isn't simply a Canadian problem, because we really do feel that, especially in the Canadian urban cities, that housing is just out of reach for so many young that are getting towards the age where they might want to marry or think, of how they want to settle down. So this truly is a global phenomenon, at least in the West.
Yeah, I think what we saw, particularly during the years of COVID, were Western governments that just really went overboard with spending, completely out of control, and that didn't show up right away in people's taxes or in their pocketbooks, because what governments did, they called this quantitative easing, but what they actually did was they printed more money. They simply printed billions and billions more dollars and inflated the money supply. So when you have, billions and billions more dollars chasing the same set of goods, prices tend to rise, and that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing the fallout from that in the form of inflation, quite rapid inflation, and of course, what goes along with that is higher interest rates. And so the money that we've borrowed, we're now paying a bigger price to finance. In other words, to pay the interest on our debt. We're having to dig more money out of our pockets. So I think anybody who's refinanced a house or even tried to buy a house and get a mortgage in the last couple of years has realized, oh my goodness, this isn't, we're not talking about 2 and 3% interest rates anymore. It's 5, 6, 7, 8%. And that means thousands and thousands of dollars more a year that can't be spent on other things like education and even food and clothes and so on.
Right. And so were there any practical solutions offered at the conference?
Well, one thing is we definitely need to get our fiscal houses in order. We still have governments, and our Canadian governments, federally and provincially, are still incredibly guilty of this overspending. We're running huge deficits. Again, those deficits are being exacerbated by the fact that we have to pay higher interest costs.
Of course.
But even so, there's still incredible amount of overspending. So governments need to tighten their belts. That's the bottom line.
Yes, we all have as families. So the government
Mhm.
you should lead, actually, not follow. So that's interesting. Environment and energy, and this is always a hot button issue. And in some regards, perhaps the ARC conference is kind of the counterpoint to the to the Davos conference. But what was the general sentiment among conference attendees, amongst presenters, with respect to the energy and the environment?
Sure. And, this is interesting because it was actually incredibly positive. There isn't a lot of debate about whether or not there is a certain amount of climate change happening. There's general agreement that there is some. What's causing it is, that is a matter for some debate, obviously. But the bottom line is, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to run around like Chicken Little, the sky is falling, or are we going to deal with it in a reasonable way? And there are two pathways. One is the one that many of our Western governments are pursuing, which is, oh my goodness, we have to eliminate emissions, or we have to reduce emissions dramatically, and as a consequence, undermine or even really harm our economies and our ability to pay for things like social programs and healthcare. And then there's another option, and this is what was proposed at the conference, which is, let's adapt. Let's find ways to deal with the issues that climate change raises, because quite frankly, this is a slow-moving issue. It's not like we're going to wake up tomorrow and the world's going to end. We're talking about very modest increases in world temperature over time, and we can adapt just as human civilization has adapted in the past. So let's use technology to find ways to do things better, and over time we can face the challenge that climate change may present to us. By the way, it's not all negative. Some aspects of climate change are quite positive. Areas that couldn't grow crops before will be able to in the future. That includes in Canada.
Yeah, I actually just had a discussion about this with my 13-year-old son. We were talking about how, as I learned when I was interviewing some guests here previously, that higher carbon increases, larger amounts of carbon actually does increase higher yields in farming. So, it's a balancing act. There's pros and then there's cons. So It's quite, and to your point, I think there are still, especially amongst the young, and we'll pick this up in the next segment, but there is actually a panic with young people. I think a lot of young people, for better or worse, have bought into the concern that the climate is really at a standpoint, and if we don't do something now, then we're doomed soon. Anyways, we'll pick this up in just a few moments.